Thank you all for joining us today for our next ICTalk. As those of you that signed up are rolling in, I'm going to go ahead and handle the housekeeping items for us. So if this is the first time you're joining us, the Society of Professional Journalists International Community is a community of journalists that aim to promote press freedom globally. Last year, at the beginning of the pandemic, our aim was to connect journalists at a time when it was difficult to do so in person with the start of the talk series. Now, more than a year later, we've had numerous guests that have joined us and have since expanded to experts and organizations from all corners of the globe. If you're wondering about the format, it's really simple. The guests and I are going to have a conversation. If you have a question, please make sure to include that in the Q&A section, and we'll make sure to weave them in during the conversation. What we're going to do is unmute you, and you can ask the question directly. If you prefer for me to ask it for you, please make sure to note that, and I'll do that for you. If you have any technical questions, please share them in the comments. My co-chair, Dan Kubisky, will keep an eye on that for us. Now, for our guests today, we have Jessica O'Byrne, the creator and producer and host of GymCastic podcast. I consider her the authority of all things gymnastics, and her work can be seen on Los Angeles Times, Huffington Post, but you can also see her in the HBO's At the Heart of Gold. At the Heart of Gold, where it exposed the story about Larry Nassar and his abuse of gymnastics athletes. Also recently, you can see her on Peacock's newest docuseries, Gold, which follows the journey of elite gymnast athletes going to the Olympics this year. Thank you, Jessica, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
We also have Romanian journalist Cosmin Bogdan, who collaborated with Jessica on a story for over a year for GymCastic, and we're really excited to talk to you as well, Cosmin. Thank you for joining us.
It's nice to be here.
So before we usually start the series or the talk, I like to ask the guests how they got into journalism or to the position they're in right now. So maybe Jess, can you start, and then maybe Cosmin, can you follow?
I got into journalism out of a sense of outrage and anger over how athletes and gymnasts in particular, because I love gymnastics, were treated for so many years, and how all of the stories about what happened never seemed to make it to the major news outlets that cover gymnastics every 4 years. And so I felt like there was, during the Olympics, so I felt like there was definitely a way for, and a need and a want for there to be a watchdog group constantly covering the sport, so that the powers in charge, the USOPC, USA Gymnastics, always knew that someone was going to be there to ask about everything, to ask for receipts, to ask for an explanation of how the athletes were treated, why they were treated that way. And so out of being a super fan who was angry all the time, I started this podcast, and that's how it began.
I love that. And Cosmin?
Oh, my beginnings were not so were not so based in principle. I mean, basically, I didn't have a place to work at one point, and I had a very good friend who was in the media and said, "Hey, guess what? That's an empty spot at my desk. You should join." And that was, I think, 20 years ago. So there were some difficult first 2 years until I understand what media is.
How is it in Romania? What's the process like getting into journalism in Romania?
My process was pretty hard, because I mean, the first 3 or 4 years you need to prove yourself, and you're not going to get into a major publication until you, at least at that point, at that time. Now with the online media, things are different, but no one would let you get a story into print without being a little bit talented or having something to say. So I think the first 2 years were pretty rough, and I actually banged my head on a office wall trying to come up with stories, and it was a rough beginning. But I had some good teachers and some good people actually, you know, helping me with this. And I think it was a lucky period anyway. I finished university with a criminal law degree. So and that was a period when corruption stories in Romania were big. So I was like, my bosses at that time said that you should do these stories. I mean, you are in the criminal law, just go. And off I went to the courts, to the, you know, working with the police, and I did that for about 10 or 12 years. Major criminal stories, corruption stories, you name it, archives.
Almost
And yeah, after 12 years, I upgraded myself to
I feel like
think
that's a perfect segue into how your worlds came together, right?
yeah.
So Jess, can you tell us about the project that you guys worked on together? How did that come about? How did that even start? And then we'll go into, maybe Cosmin can talk about like the process of everything.
Yeah, so we actually had you guys had met at the Olympic trip for Korea. And so you told me you have to meet this journalist from Romania. You guys have to talk about gymnastics. So we had a dinner, and basically it was just me and Cosmin, like outraged, you know, yelling at the table about Romanian gymnastics. And I was like, someone totally understands. I was like, why aren't people as outraged as I am all the time? And Cosmin understood. So we instantly had a connection. And he told me about some things that were public, just totally public knowledge, because of the Securitate, with the secret police in Romania during communism. They were public knowledge in Romania that were not public knowledge here. And I was like, how do people not know about this? And so that is how we began working on a project and we've been working on it for the past year, a year to the day, actually. Cosmin just remembered about, you know, exposing what is in the Securitate files and helping. And part of the reason this is so important to me, from US gymnastics journalism perspective, was that the Karolis were Nadia's coaches. They came to the United States, and then they just started a system of their system of abuse continued, but in a much lesser manner in the United States. But also their system of coaching and of corruption essentially led to a culture of abuse, which enabled former Dr. Larry Nassar to abuse. It's the biggest abuse story I think we know of in sports ever, and maybe second to the Catholic Church. So it's part of the survivors of that have wanted the receipts. They're not happy with the investigations that have happened so far, and they want to know, how did we get to this point? What was the culture that allowed this to happen? And of course, abusive culture exists everywhere. I mean, it's not just gymnastics, and that's why this is important. This could be public schools, this could be cheerleading, this could be your soccer team, right? It's everywhere, your church, whatever. But it's about finding out, how was this allowed to happen, and how did we create a system where athletes, parents, other doctors, physical therapists, everyone was afraid to speak up from retaliation. And, you know, this is a story as old as time. But part of the importance of, even now when everything has been exposed, getting these receipts about the Karolis is part of helping those survivors get answers. And so Cosmin did amazing work on the ground, and really, it's so important, I think, to work with someone, a journalist who knows the culture, understands the history, can bring context to things, because as an American, I cannot understand that stuff. You have to talk to locals and help you navigate it. And that's where Cosmin was so amazing.
I mean, and then your criminal law background, Cosmin, I think really helped, right? The beginning of your career in journalism, just knowing how to.
For sure. And I think it helped me a lot during this research also. I need to say that discussion that Jessica mentioned happened 4 years ago. So it was in September 2017. And the NASA scandal was I think, maybe I'm mistaken, but it was as high as it can get. So for me, when I speak when I spoke with Jessica a year ago, for me was actually something that had a lot of time to develop somewhere inside. I wanted personally, I wanted to know what happened. I know Jessica mentioned that I spoke with her 4 or 5 years ago about things that were public knowledge, but that's not enough for a journalist. You need to go to the source. So I wanted to see the documents myself. I just wanted to, in a way, prove or disprove some of my assumptions. So. But the process was long. I mean, probably in another country with another system, probably the documentation would last a little bit short time. But it was a full saga, and I know that at one point I told Jessica it's going to be slow and painful. This is how it's going to work: slow and painful. And this is because we started discussing about it last year in, I think it was.
Was this pre-pandemic?
We had some discussion pre-pandemic when heavy metals was done, right?
Yeah, I did an interview for Heavy Metals, which is an ESPN podcast series, and I did an interview with them, and I was like, I know this amazing journalist in Romania can help you get the documents, and then I put them in contact with Cosmin, so to try to get that to happen. Yeah,
and I spoke with them, and I told them there are a lot of files, and we need boots on the ground. But unfortunately, pandemic was right around the corner, and a few months later, Jessica said, we need to do this. Okay, let's do it. But it was, the process of certification myself as a researcher for the archives took, I think, 3 or 4 months. So it was bureaucratic. But
so a process like this would have been impossible for Jess to do it from abroad, right? This had to be something where
it would definitely be impossible last year, okay, because the border was closed, no one was traveling, was very difficult to enter the country. The archives were on and off, were closed most of the time. I had a lucky break in sometime around October. I managed to enter for about a week, and just to skim through the files and tell them what I need to photocopy. And that was basically what happened. And when we received all the files that I requested, we started to look at them and piece all the puzzle together. But the files, just to get the files out of there, just to get a CD, took another 3 months. So it was incredible. It was incredibly slow.
And I don't speak Romanian, so it was definitely like, you have to, it would have been like there would have been a lot of wasted time if I had gone and just tried to, get everything. So it really made a difference to have someone who knew, like, here, I could give key things that I wanted to know about, and then he brought up the stuff that was worthwhile, not worthwhile, skip it, that kind of stuff. So yeah.
But probably could have taken even more, because at one point I needed to contact some sources. I put my hand on the phone. Do you know someone there? Because I need to get access.
Right.
It's quite high.
If someone was to go to a country and get a fixer,
that
is really important to have.
It is. Yeah,
we had to like send a letter, right, and say why we were doing it, what it was for. That had to get approved. It's not like I could have just shown up at flown to Romania and be like, knock knock, I would like access to these things, please. That's not how it worked.
There are explanations that I had to give there, because there are. Let me explain a little bit how the archives work. So there is a national interest for the people to be able to come and to study the archives, okay? But it's not like anyone can come through the street and study at the archives. You need to be a certified researcher. So there is a process. So you need to answer some questions. Why do you want to do this? What's the purpose? Where are you going to publish? Are you going to, for example, expose some some private life aspects or not. I mean, that's very important for them to try to not, because in these archives we have a lot of victims, we have a lot of survivors, okay, and they are very careful not producing more harm than
Right.
you know the officers and the secret police guys already did.
At any point, were you worried about security? I mean, you're digging up information about.
No. No. There is this is a very different context. Probably I don't know. Probably maybe in early 90s that would be a concern, but the files were not available for research in early 90s. I mean, the first files were available in 2009, and in steps, I think they managed to enlarge the number of documents that are available.
So the first episode that I heard was one on May 11th, correct, Jess? And that one, you announced that it's Project Special K. Is that, am I correct?
Project K for the Corollis.
Project K. So how many episodes are you planning on having, and what's the format going to be for people that want to tune in to find out more about the documents and what happened?
So yeah, not everything has been released now, and part of that decision to like what to do when is sort of everything got sort of sped up because there's a great book out by Stej Alaru, but it's only in Romanian about he delved into the same stuff, but his perspective was Nadia's experience, and our perspective is the receipts about how this culture got to where it is in the United States. And so, the
Corollis.
Yeah, for the Corollis specifically, and the receipts for the survivors. And so, we did. So the plan is to do about 5 podcasts on this specifically. And the first interview we did was with Dr. Simona Petrovic. And it was important. And I think what was so great about working with Cosmin is he understands, like, as a man, that I also wanted women's perspective on what was it like for a Romanian woman who was alive during this time? What was the culture like? What was normal? Is what I consider, as a, what am I, millennial, Z, X, I'm something, not that generation, that I need to understand, like, what I consider, like, why didn't they just say something? Why didn't they just speak out? Like, I can't understand what it was like to be a woman of that age at that time under communism. So talked to another researcher who had looked at some of these documents and got her perspective on it. And then also the hard part about deciding when to put everything out is that, many gymnasts who are survivors of what happened with the former doctor are still competing. Simone Biles is the one that's out in the open and speaking about it, but she's not the only one. And what has been hard for them is that every time that they go to compete, that there's a big event, the survivors who are done with the sport and are still wanting justice, and the lawyers involved in wanting, USA Gymnastics to settle the lawsuit, are bringing stuff up and out in the middle of competitions. And it's totally understandable why they're doing that, because that's when people are paying attention, right? So of course you want when you have the most eyes. I totally understand that. I have no problem with that. But for the survivors that are speaking out but are still in the sport, it can be really triggering for them. And like, this is what they've worked for their entire lives. And so it's hard to decide when to put the things out that also won't, make them have a panic attack in the morning of a competition, literally. So, so that's why it's sort of like we kind of stopped, it started again. So hoping to put some more out now, but do it in a way that is respectful to the survivors who are still in the middle of what they've worked their entire lives for.
And so what was the end, like, after a year of doing this work, both of you, what was the result of looking into these documents, your perspective? Was it what you expected?
Jessica?
Or was
no, it's so much worse. It's so much worse. Like, I knew, we already had abusive culture in the United States. Like, the Corollis didn't invent being abusive to kids and to athletes. But I didn't know that it was so well documented. And then it wasn't just a, one time someone complained. I didn't know that there were teachers, parents, doctors, nutrition, the dietitians, the trainers who had gone to the party over and over and over to complain about the abuse of the Crowleys. And this wasn't just abuse that was like, well, it was the 70s, so it was normal to punch a kid in the head. No, not normal. Yeah. That was not normal. This abuse was so much worse than the, getting a spanking or whatever's normal in that time in Romania, that it rose to the level of everyone in the community reporting them. And I didn't know that Nadia had refused to train with the Crowleys. That's how bad it was. That's not common knowledge in the United States.
I mean, I think there are a lot of information that are in the files, and that they're actually painting a very different image that the one Carol is presenting in the US. So we are now able to verify, for example, what they've been saying for years in the United States about the years they spent in Romania. And we know that there is a big difference between the two realities, okay, or the two stories. We know for a fact a lot about the background of the Carolis, their education, for example. We know how well prepared they were when they took the team. We know, for example, what they did, or what were what was the course of action for the secret police and party members regarding to with regard to the abuses. I mean, what they did. We know when the parents started to complain. We know, I mean, we have a pretty good image of what happened throughout the 70s and the beginning of the 80s. We know exactly when the conflict between Nadia and the Carolis erupted. We know exactly when the conflict between Nadia's family and the Carolis erupted. We actually know, for example, and I'm going to give you a little detail, that at one point Nadia's mother asked someone to put a little letter in Bucharest in the postal office that's on the wall of the central committee, the party central committee, just for that letter to get to Nicolae Ceausescu and for her to get an interview, to speak with the party leaders and speak about the abuses. I mean, there are so many informations there, and I just want to point something out. I think, Jessica, there is very we can look at these files, but it's very important to understand if we can trust the files. So this is why Jessica, I think, did a very good step in speaking with two professional researchers. One interview is already online. Hopefully I'm not I'm not ruining your exclusivity. The other one, it's a famous Romanian historian who wrote about Nadia, and it's very important because we have at least two sources that can for sure say that these documents can be trusted. Okay, the information in these documents can be trusted. Wow. So we can use them as reliable sources.
The documents that you're saying that have been, like, just the fact that this has been documented so extensively. I mean, Jess, have we seen this in other countries with other, like, do we see this in the US, or is it just unique to see that Romanians documented that abuse so much? Like, was it back in the 80s?
I feel like this is special to Romania because Romania has a vested interest in preventing a communist dictatorship, and for people to be treated like this again. I think probably the system in the former DDR in East Germany is probably the only other place in the Western culture that I know of that has archives available the way that that they do in Romania. And it's because people have a right to see what was being collected on them. And And both systems were the same. I mean, people were tortured, their lives were ruined. I mean, this isn't, it's not cute. It's horrible. And
but
just, yeah.
One more point. We have all these files because, and so we have the files, we have the records because the system didn't work, actually. So we have documents from the secret police because no one in the proper authorities would have done anything. So in a communist country, everything is perfect. Okay, there is no child abuse. There are no abusers, right? So the only institution that can handle information like that is the secret police. Okay, and they were interested in knowing and in documenting this and in pushing this information up to the letter to higher party levels, just for them to know. Right. I mean that was the way these records were created. I mean that, but the main issue is that no one did anything at that point. I mean, we know the scandal was big at the local level. The scandal in Onești Training Center was so big that Carol's had to move basically to another center.
They got demoted.
I mean, yeah, I mean, everyone at the local party level, security level, local security, everyone was fed up with that.
Right. So we have a question that just came in from our president-elect for SBJ, Rebecca Aguilar. She asked, why didn't parents pull their kids out after consistent abuse? Were they threatened if they would do that? If they would be hurt? Also, the Karolis, were they given the power by the government? And then she says, thank you for your research. Are the files you collected going to be translated and put out so the public can read it? And will you collaborate on a book? So a lot of questions. So let's tackle the part, why didn't the parents pull their kids out? Was there a potential threat that they would be hurt?
Well, some of them did. I mean, those are the stories that we don't know about.
Right.
I mean, a lot of them did. We have in the files knowledge that there were some kids pulled out of the program. There were some kids who were excluded by the Karolis. I mean, there is a case. Sorry, Jessica, I need to give some examples.
This one's good for you.
Yeah.
So there is a case of an athlete that I think won a medal. I'm not going to give the name. Won a medal in '76 Olympics. That was pulled up from the team just because she was keeping a journal in which she was at a very young age, writing documenting all the abuses. And Bella Caroli actually found her journal, and after that she was excluded from the team. There were a lot of kids that didn't get to that level. Why those kids who remained? I think it's because probably for the parents and for the athletes themselves, there was a point of no return. They accomplished so much at that point that they were in a way, they just compromised, and they said, okay, we're gonna push forward. But not all of them did. I mean, Teodora Ungureanu left Karolis and didn't trade with Karoli after 1977. Other big athletes also were trained by someone else. What we don't know, and it's in the files, is that Karolis were the elect trainers for all the major events, international major events, but some of the athletes were actually trained by someone else in the country.
It was the power to the Karolis given to them by the government? Like, where did this power?
Yes. Starting in 1976, right before Montreal, and years before that, but there is a major episode in 1976. Bella Caroli developed a very good relation with a high party member called Ilie Verdeț, who actually in 1979 became the prime minister of Romania. So he had a lot of backing. Okay, but that backing didn't help him in the relations with the state security. I mean, the state security didn't matter. It wasn't concerned necessarily with your relations. There was a very small group of people who were not followed by the secret police, but those were the very high end, the very top members of the party. But Bela Karli was not necessarily one of them, but he was very well connected. He was and he used those connections. Another example, in 1976 in Montreal, Marta Karoli should have not been present. She was not the designated woman coach for the Montreal Olympics, and Bela Karoli did all these interventions via political lines, and managed to bring Marta also. So yeah, he collaborated. I mean, this is another aspect that we need to clarify. He was for some time a secret police informant, and he was a party collaborator. He was a trusted person in the eyes of the party.
And has there been feedback from the Karolis or Nadia from just from the start of the release of your project or your story?
The Karolis have not responded. I've sent some specific questions and requested comment from them. They have not. Nadia put out a blanket kind of statement that it's in the past and I've moved on from that, which is understandable. Like when you see all the things that she's been through, on the one hand, you wonder why she hadn't been more outraged and spoken out more. And on the other hand, for me, I mean, it's just my perspective on this is, you understand how she's like, I did what I had to do, and I don't want to go there anymore in a way. But Cosmin has a lot of feelings about that and a different perspective, I think, that I do on that. But to go back to answer this question, also just to further what Cosmin said, what I really helped me understand this whole system more is the Securitate was basically collecting things to blackmail people with, but they could only use the blackmail materials privately because everything in a communist society is perfect, right? There's no problems, the perfect kind of society. So that is how they would turn people into informants. And to see, I can also understand why Nadia never wants to go here again, because I don't know how she trusts any human being again in her entire life. Everyone around her was, from the kids she was in school with, were required to be informants. They had listening devices in everywhere she was. I mean, I don't know how in her house, on her phone, in every room in the house. I mean, it's just crazy the way that she was spied on. But I also want to say, we see the same kind of, I think the reason that people don't that put up with abuse, and we see this in the United States to this day. I mean, people can go look at Riley McCusker's Instagram post that she made yesterday, who is an Olympic hopeful, and she put up with the same kind of abuse, physical, emotional, all of it. In the United States, right here, her coach got banned for 8 years, and then they reduced the sentence. It's the longest ban we've had, not being a permanent ban in gymnastics. And she is the only active gymnast in the United States elite who is currently suing her coach for abuse and competing at the same time. She's the first one that's ever done that. And she talked about how, kind of why she put up with it and why she decided to move on, and wanted to let other gymnasts know that you can find a healthy environment and still stay and still be successful. And the problem is that athletes are brainwashed and their parents are brainwashed. So you have to think of this like a cult, that, if you stay in this system, it's going to work for you. Then this is the only way. And I'm the only one that can get you there. And if you don't stay with me, it's all going to fall apart, and you're worthless because you're only worth what you're doing in the sport, and the rest of your life, you'll be nothing if you don't stay in this abusive relationship. And it's the same everywhere. It's the same in the United States. And I think that the other thing to think about is when you're in those abusive relationships, right? You don't want anyone else to know because it's embarrassing. So kids will tell their parents once. The parent goes to the coach and says, what are you doing? I'm going to pull my kid out of here. The kid then gets punished because the parent stood up for them, and it's worse than when they didn't tell their parents. So then they never speak again about what's been happening to them. And that is the same thing we see over and over here. I also, the thing that's interesting about why I think that these documents are so important to release now is that you can see a direct line, not a zigzag, a direct, like imagine a pin in one of those conspiracy theory movies and it's going straight line to another person. In the Ropes and Gray report, which is one of the investigations done on USA Gymnastics after the crimes of the former doctor, and I say former doctor because in gymnastics and doing gymnastics podcasts, we try not to say his name because it's really triggering and we don't want to give him more publicity than the athletes who are surviving and trying to move forward. So that's why I do that. It's kind of like Voldemort. Marta Caroli, in those reports, there's an interview with another doctor who told Larry Nassar at an Olympics why he was like, why aren't you treating the athletes in the regular training room? Like, you shouldn't be treating them privately in an apartment. They need to be with the rest of the athletes and the rest of the medical staff. You shouldn't be treating them alone. That's a red flag, alone. He was told not to treat them alone. And Marta Caroli went in and said that, or Nassar reported that Marta Caroli told him he didn't want any of the athletes treated around boxers. I don't want anyone treated around a boxer. Don't want the gymnasts around boxers. And I think this is one of the things that I had to understand culturally about what it was like to be a woman in communist Romania during the time when Marta was married to Bella. She's still married to Bella, but was working in Romania. It's like abuse was part of her life and her relationship with Bella as well. And
was a boxer.
Who was a boxer. Bella Crowley was a boxer. So the complicated nature of culture and sexism in that system was she was trying to protect the athletes from, these boxers and other men that might abuse them, because that was part of her history as a woman. And that directly led to them being sexually abused.
Wow.
I would say that in the files you can see, the nature of relation, as much as I know, that the Carolis had with the doctor, let's not say the name Voldemort. It's the same in the files from the 70s. I mean, they sacked every doctor that disagreed with them, and they kept every doctor that was a friend with them, that was well behaved, and who did everything that they wanted to do, which was basically nothing for the athletes. So it's kind of crazy because they kept the same kind of relations with the US doctors that they have with the Romanian doctors. I mean, from my perspective, I'm going to be blunt. There is no, for me, there's no question mark why you would find a sexual predator under the roof of two child molesters. There is no, sorry.
Child abusers, yep.
Yeah, there's no question for me. That's a very straight line for me.
Yep.
And it's a doctor that, in a way, they protected for years.
Yep. And it's true. I mean, that is the thing. You have two child abusers. Of course, that's where a child molester is going to thrive, is right underneath them. And to answer your question as well about the translations, that is another thing that took a little longer. I had to find funding to translate the documents professionally because it was not cheap. Because I got like summaries from Cosmin and translations from Cosmin, and then I worked with another a female journalist in gymnastics who's Romanian, native Romanian, who helped with that as well. And then getting those translated took a little while. And then they will be available, not everything, because we still do, even though these were released, there's still people, these people are all alive still.
Right.
Most,
And my next question was going to be like, how do you, this would be a great tip for journalists that are planning on covering subject matters like this that can be very sensitive. What tips would you give them as to how to approach it? I mean, aside from the collaboration, because there's lots of sensitive information there. The fact that you're approaching it this way, like what tips would you give other journalists that are thinking about covering topics like this?
I think it's important to not create more harm that was already done. I mean, our purpose was to expose the lies, right? to give the right image and the correct informations about what happened in 70s in Romania, and to try to, let's say, correlate some of their behavior in the 70s in the communist Romania with what happened after, but not to create extra pressure on the survivors. That's not the point. I think for me, the files, it's about 2 or 3 names, and those names are not the names of the athletes, and some of them are living in the US, by the way.
Lots of them are living in the US and coaching still, and are at the meets that I've been to in the last year. So yeah, not creating more harm is the number one thing. To your question about we collaborate on a book, I think that's a great idea. So if anyone has if there's any book editors on here, book agents, we're available. So
I'll
hit
produce
us up.
your docu-series, no worries.
Yeah, it would make a great, a series on Netflix or somewhere, I think. What else do I want to say about that?
We did have a question also from Claire Reagan. Can you update us on where the Karolyi's are today?
Chilling in Texas at their house.
I mean, are they still involved in anything gymnastics related, or have they just been trying to peacefully bow out and not to get too much heat on them?
USA Gymnastics knew about the charges, the allegations against Nasser as early as a year and a half before they came public. Conveniently, Marta Karolyi was going to retire right after the 2016 Olympics. And so she quietly retired. There have been no charges against her. She is part of several lawsuits, as well as Bella had retired a while earlier, but no criminal charges were filed. They closed down the ranch, which is the biggest conflict of interest ever, is that the National Team Training Center was at their house, literally at their house.
Yeah.
Insane, just insane that was allowed to go on. And so they have just retired quietly. They still live there. They didn't, escape the country and move back to Romania or Hungary. They're still here, and they don't have any, they don't do anything with gymnastics anymore, but there's still a camp of athletes, their former athletes, who just love them and think they were the greatest thing ever, and want to defend them. And then there's a group of athletes who have spoken out for a long time about them and the abuse. And then there's some that are just now, it took these crimes of the former doctor coming to the fore for them to realize that all of their internal feelings about how they were treated were totally valid, and has led to really painful reconciliation for them personally. And those are people that are still coaching today. And you've seen how the pattern of abuse has just repeated. And you've seen them like coming to the realization, like, oh my God, I didn't realize I was continuing the cycle.
And I think regarding Romanian gymnastics, it's important to understand that what they did in Romania in the 70s actually created the trend. We actually have in the files reports that were from people in the gymnastic structure who were talking about the fact that other coaches are copying what they are doing. And we now know 40 years after that, we had abuses during the 80s, the 90s, and the 2000s, and there were some athletes, Olympic athletes, in the past 10 or 15 years who came out and spoke about those abuses. And it's an ongoing story, and it's a story that not a lot of people want necessarily to speak about here. Everyone wants to go to move on, but that's not gonna I'm not comfortable in living with that kind of image or that kind of lie,
Yeah, and I think a lot of times like people think about, well, this is gymnastics, like, oh my God, it's like young girls and old creepy dudes, and like of course it's like this. But I mean, I think the point of this is looking at from the journalistic perspective, like our jobs are to hold people in power accountable, right? And this is everywhere. It is not just gymnastics. It's not a leotard issue. It is everywhere. It's it is a power differential issue. That is the common denominator throughout the world, everywhere. And all of you watching this know that, right? Like, it is about power. And when someone has power that goes unchecked, abuse will happen, period, no matter what the age of the people are. This is adults. This is, it's all over the world. And so this is where if people learn how to put power in check and have balances and accountability, if the athletes learn this as children, if the parents learn this going through the process, this is something that applies everywhere in life. And it's so important to not see this as a sports issue, to see this as a power issue anywhere.
Yeah, and it's a gruesome story. I mean, it's 50 years now that they started training, and they brought their method, of training to the scene. And I mean, how many hundreds of victims we have?
That just blows my mind. Just to make sure, let everyone know there's a 10-minute warning. So if you have any questions for Jess or Cosmin, make sure to put them in the Q&A section, and we'll make sure you can ask the question directly. So guys, we just have a note from Rebecca saying that Simon & Schuster will be at our conference this year, where they're going to give a tip from a news story to a book. So maybe that could be the segue into the collaboration with you guys for doing a book. So I want to do a little bit of a piggyback into Jess, the start of GymCastic, just because I want to make sure those that, like, especially with journalists that are starting out and covering a beat, and then they decide to, like yourself, you did a podcast on something that you're very knowledgeable about, and it just kind of exponentially grew into something that's just, you're the authority on gymnastics, whether, so what tips would you give to those journalists as to how to start that, and what kind of tips would you give them as to like how to framework that for success?
Be of service. Be of service. The way that we have been successful, because it's not just me, it's a team of people, and I got, the best like gymnastics bloggers, the people that I knew who were super knowledgeable and funny, because we need to be entertaining, because no one wants to listen to a bunch of depressing shit nonstop every single day. Like, we had to like make it entertaining. It's a sport. It's supposed to be fun, right? And then that's how we can tackle the harder, darker issues. Get a great team around you and be of service. One of the things that we've always strived to do is to help the other journalists who don't get to cover this all year round nonstop, who are then thrown into an Olympic trials, like just happened this last week, and are like, I think I'm writing this right, but I haven't had time to research the sport for the last 30 years. We want to help them do their jobs better. So one of the reasons that, it took a long time to get access from USA Gymnastics, they did not want us around, and the new regime is better. They still have problems, but it's better. Is that, on the Media Tribune, the other, major outlets will come to us and say, do I understand this rule right? Am I interpreting this correctly? If I ask this athlete this, like, have they already answered this? I don't want to ask them for the 150th time. We want to make it better for, number one, for the athletes, for the system, but then also to help other journalists be better at their jobs when you don't have the same amount of time that we could devote to this all the time. So being of service, and it's interesting, as gymnastics grows, one of the first times that I've been at an event like this where I saw competitiveness from some of the outlets, and I was just like, oh, that's not, you take that to the NFL. Like, we're not like that here. Like, we're chill, we help each other. The athletes come first, their health and happy and safety and all that stuff comes first. So that is the underlying fundamental, is be of service.
Wonderful. And then when do you think that GymCastic was able to have that platform that you have now? Was there like a specific story or a moment that just gave you the notoriety or the respect within the industry?
I think we've had like a couple of athletes do interviews where they talked about things that they never talked about before. And I think that the way we allowed them to be themselves. So if they wanted to come on and cuss nonstop, they could do that. Like a lot of times, you know, gymnasts are framed as everything they say have to be as children, but these are adults who have lives and they want to express things the way they want to express it. So we are an uncensored platform for people to be themselves. But I think the biggest moment came when Michaela Maroney, who you remember from the 2016 Olympics, 2012 Olympics in London, amazing athlete, incredible vaulter, you know, stuck her landing, did the unimpressed face on the podium. She chose us to do her kind of exit interviews from gymnastics. So she had suffered horrible abuses from her coaches, and she wanted to talk about that, and she wasn't ready to talk about all the stuff with the doctor yet, but she chose us because she knew that we knew the sport, we wouldn't ask her, you know, dumb questions, and that she would be in a safe space to talk about what she had been through. And she wanted to do that again, to be of service and to help other gymnasts, and so that those kind of abuses wouldn't happen in the future. And so that really made a big difference. And that interview got picked up by, you know, from CNN to the New York Times to everywhere.
And then are you planning on going to the Olympics?
I am going to the Olympics. It's going to be horrible. Just so you guys, and all of you that have covered an Olympics, you already know it's gnarly. Yeah, everything's changing. It has just been a total chaos. Everything changes every day. We never get the stuff that we're supposed to get on time to turn in by some deadline by Tokyo. It is just like, I just expect to be like, you know, so grateful and happy to be there to get to watch gymnastics and all of that stuff, but for it personally to be a sweaty human nightmare, basically, full of people sticking stuff up my nose. That's what's going to happen.
Oh gosh, that's hilarious.
And it was really hard to get a credential for the Olympics. Like as an independent organization with we haven't been around for 40 years having like a magazine like International Gymnast and stuff like that. So we had to go through a process. It took years to get our credential for the USOPC because we're part of the official American Team USA delegation of journalists going to the Olympics. So the process was that you have to have an advocate. So I had, as a person who's an organization applying for the first time for a credential for the Olympics, the advocate calls you, and it turned out it was like a journalism professor from Utah, I think. And he asked me a whole bunch of questions. He said, I'm your advocate, so tell me about your show, what you do, what makes you different, why do you deserve this, what have you done that's, you know, contributing to the landscape of coverage on this. And so I told him, you know, I pleaded my case to him, and then he pleaded my case to the USOPC. I have no idea what happened and how it went down, but he did it. So thanks to that guy. And that's, you know, that's how we made it. But it's a long process.
Oh my goodness. Well, we're heading towards the end of the conversation, and I wanted to make sure if there's anything you guys want to add about the Karolyi story before we go into our final question about press freedom. Is there anything you want to add about maybe something that you want the public to know about the story? Maybe we haven't discussed yet.
I'll leave this to Cosmin.
I think there is a lot of information that it's new and will create a very different image than the one that Karolyi's try to create in the US and even in Romania after 1989. So I think stay tuned. Jessica's gonna bring the good stuff.
Amazing. Jess, is there anything you want to add to that, or is?
I guess I would just say that like it's been so, I cannot emphasize enough how it would have been a disaster had I, as an American woman, just decided to apply my value system and my culture onto this story. It was absolutely essential for a story like this to have multiple points of view from women and men to help you understand a story like this and help you understand the context. The context is so incredibly important, and it really could be damaging, and I could have done more damage if I didn't have Cosmin to guide me through this and everyone else that's helped with this story. It's just absolutely vital, and that's why the word diversity gets thrown around a lot, and like we don't think of it in this context, but the cultural perspective is incredibly important for this kind of story.
And it changed a lot. I mean, the culture in the 70s and the social, habits in the 1970s communist Romania are very different from what is today. I mean, the younger generation that was born after, let's say, 1990, 2000, have no idea. I mean, there's a huge difference. So yeah, totally agree.
So one thing that we do towards the end of our conversations with all of our journalists or guests, we always ask them, what does press freedom mean to them? So maybe Jess, if you can start, and then we'll end with Cosmin.
I wrote it down, so I'd be ready for this. So it sounds perfect because I'm a talker, not a writer like a lot of you. So, okay. So press freedom is being able to have access to shed light even on the darkest stories and being able to share the truth without retaliation.
I love that. And Cosmin, what does press freedom mean to you?
For me, it's accountability. I mean, and I'm again speaking from this cultural experience, because, for example, Romanian society changed a lot in the past 30 years, just because there was a media, and there were media outlets there that were holding accountable the people in power, and they were nagging them about the bad habits and the corruption and the criminality. So it's I think it's a lot about accountability, and I think in this case about the Carolys, it's about accountability. We need to know. I mean, I personally need to know. It's a personal story for me.
Wonderful. And is there anything else you guys want to add before we end the session that you think we may not have covered that you think is important to kind of mention to the public?
I guess my one add to this is something my mom reminded me, who's a therapist, when I started really delving into the dark stories, is who's this? I think Thich Nhat Hanh said this: when you fight a monster, be careful not to become the monster. Don't do more harm than the harm you are investigating.
Cosmin, anything you want to add?
Well, no, I prefer to leave the readers to read.
Gosh, I feel like we can have like a few more hours and just go on and on.
I know I have so much information.
There's so much to say.
It's so much to say, but we don't want to ruin it for everyone.
Well, maybe we can have a follow-up with you guys as you release more pieces of the story, and then we can have you guys back to kind of dig deeper into that as well, because I would love to. I think this is something that would be very beneficial for our community. Just the fact that you guys were able to collaborate internationally during the pandemic and successfully, I think it's a great foundation for others to look to you guys to how to do that. So I commend you both for doing that over a span of the year. And thank God for SPJ, the conference where you guys brought Cosmin out to California. You guys can meet, and that's just, I love that.
Yeah,
I think Jessica for the patience that she had. So slow, Jessica, slow and painful worked in the end.
I love that. Okay, so for those that are tuning in, thank you for joining us. Hopefully we'll have Jess and Cosmin back as the story. They have more elements of their story released to the public. We also want to announce that we have our next ICTalk that you can register for when our next newsletter comes out. It's going to be July 13th at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, tracking terrorists and UFOs, covering national security issues and what it all means. Our guest is going to be Paul Shinkman, the national security correspondent for U.S. News and World Report. Paul has covered conflicts around the world as well as security issues in the United States. So be sure to check out our newsletter on Friday for more details of how to sign up. Jess and Cosmin, thank you. Thank you so much. I know, Cosmin, you're tuning in at a different time zone, and I appreciate that you made this work. And Jess, always, you're the best, and you're a legend. So
thank you. And thank you to Cosmin. I could not have done this at all without him, and he was amazing.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all for tuning in. We hope to see you next time on July 13th. Everyone take care. Bye, guys.